I'm delighted to be joined once again on the Celtic Exchange by financial analyst David Lowe. Many Celtic fans will remember David as one of the key players in Fergus McCann's takeover of Celtic just over 30 years ago. And today, amongst other things, we'll discuss the rumours that have emerged of a new American takeover in Glasgow and what that might mean to Celtic. David, welcome back to the show all the way from Texas, no less. Before we get into some of the takeover talk, what's your summary on the latest financial figures from Celtic? They released those half-year financials just a couple of weeks ago. Your thoughts on the headlines there?
Yeah, well, the figures are very good. It did encompass all the success we've had in the Champions League, as well as a sold-out stadium, everything that goes with being a winning team. So the figures were expected to be good, and the figures were very good. I'm assuming you don't want me to go into them, but record figures at the 6-month stage, and Celtic's brokers are forecasting the best financial year ever, turnover of £140 million.
Yes, it's crazy numbers. I'll give the headlines. We'll not go deep on it, but I'll give the headlines just for your comments. So revenues of 83.5 million, down very slightly from 85.2 million in 2023. A net gain on player trading of 21.5 million. That includes sales of guys like Matt O'Reilly, Tomoko Iwata, Mikey Johnson, Kobayashi, amongst others. Notable costs for Celtic this time around, aside from player acquisitions, of course, were the ongoing developments at Barrafield and Lennoxtown, as well as at Celtic Park itself. And I suppose one of the most important figures is that cash in the bank figure, David, although you can tell me your thoughts on football clubs, holding cash and what that means. But cash in the bank at this moment in time of 65.4 million. What's your main takeaways from those results, David?
Well, Celtic are invariably top of the league these days. Therefore, they get a good chance of entering the Champions League. And when you do that, you get the extra games at the premium prices, and that all goes onto your revenue. And these numbers are all reflected in Celtic's financial statements. But when all's said and done, it's your ability to play the transfer market that makes the difference. And Celtic have been consistently above average in doing that for more years than not. And that is essentially what's responsible for the cash balance that we have, which off the top of the head was around 70 million. And it may well be higher than that by the end of the year, depending on how the last 4 months of the year pan out. But, Celtic's a stable ship run and a tight financial model, and the figures will never be bad, put it that way. It's just a matter of how good they are and how you spend your money as things stand. But the game is changing. Maybe Rangers are about to have a Fergus McCann moment. Who knows? That's a game changer because there's only 2 shows in town in Scotland. But the figures are very good, and the financial full year should be very good. And if you compare them with Rangers figures, we are 2 times the size of Rangers in terms of just about 2 times the size of Rangers in terms of revenue, and Rangers are like 4 times on average the size of the other wannabes, the 2 Edinburgh clubs plus Aberdeen. So it's a pretty Celtic dominate this domestic league by some considerable margin now, and everything is ours to lose. And I think our real challenge comes in Europe, and I think our ability to do well in Europe is inextricably linked to giving Brendan as much money as possible to make the team as good as it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I remember last time we spoke, one of the lines that stood out for me that I remember was your statement that Rangers were closer in financial terms, at least, to Hearts than to Celtic. Do you stick by that at the moment?
Yeah, I was a wee bit cheeky saying that, but it's a tighter game, I think, between Rangers and the other 3 teams than it's been for a while. The other 3 teams, and this is unsustainable, the other 3 teams are Hibs, Hearts and Aberdeen. They're all losing shed loads of money trying to catch up with, they think, Celtic and Rangers. And of course, Rangers are losing shed loads of money trying to keep up with Celtic. So, this is unsustainable. Eventually, the penny drops, and the UFA's financial sustainability regulations will force this onto clubs whether they want it or not, or whether they've got the money or not. So the Hibs figures are horrendous, but they've got serious backing in the form of the Black Knights, and they're doing great just now. It's just sneaked into the top 6, and well done, Hibs. Hearts are losing money, but they get ongoing support from the supporters organisation, whose name escapes me at the moment, as well as from and Budge. But again, there comes a point where you say, how long is this going for? And of course, Aberdeen have been losing money for years. Rangers we know about since they came around 2012. Started off with £20 million in the bank through an AIM listing. They've been through, I don't know, half a dozen at least chairmen, 4 different incarnations in the boardroom, and lost 100 million. That's come into a shuddering stop because I don't think there's anybody left that's willing to take more confetti, as I call it. So we're at, and I think that's really why Rangers need to get taken over. Somebody has to appear on the horizon, with a big checkbook. But I think we're at a pivotal moment in time for Scottish football and Celtic, by dint of the fact that it's in the Premier League in Scotland.
Yeah, and we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the potential takeover at Rangers, what it might mean for Rangers, what it might mean for Celtic, more importantly, as well as the fact that you mentioned Hibs there. I think it's the Black Knight Group. They're American, aren't they? And
yeah,
Aberdeen are backed, by an American there, or a Scot American. So
yeah.
there's all that side of things, and we'll get to it. And you've got the fact that Dave King, I think it was. It's not often I quote Dave King. I won't make a habit of doing so, but he's come out and talked about investor fatigue, and that's the problem at Rangers. There's so many backers that have given so much for so little in return in recent years, and that's been an issue, an ongoing issue. Before we get to that, David, just to kind of finalise on Celtic's financials, though, you spoke of the fact that regardless to an extent what Celtic are doing elsewhere, commercially and all that stuff, it's your player trading model. It's selling guys like Matt O'Reilly for 25, 30 million, and so on and so forth, that really generates the cash. What do you think of how Celtic have done their business in the transfer market in recent years, and the fact that we have seen a shift in the last 6 to 12 months with the acquisitions of guys like Adam Ida for 9.5 million, Arne Engels for 11, Jota coming back for 8, and those kind of purchases? What do you think?
Well, Celtic, as I said earlier, are pretty good, pretty experienced about doing this. It has been part of the business model for 20 years now. You can go back to Wanyama and half a dozen other players. That's the gig, that's the game, and your ability to do it well comes with years and years of practice and mistakes. But there's been a stability at Celtic for a good while now, and Celtic know what's involved. They know everybody's for sale at the right price. A lot of people say, for example, why sell Kyogo? He was a screaming sell, for me as well. The guy's the wrong side of 30. To get 10 million for a 30-year-old is a very, very good deal, and a no-brainer for me. People like me. It's what you do with the money. How do you replace a guy that scores as many goals? But he was a sale because he was in the sell zone. Your value goes down once you're post 27. The sweet spot's 24 to 27, but your value starts to erode the wrong side at 27. Giamakis went for the same reason. What'd you do that for? Well, if you stick to your ruthless plan of player trading, he was a sell, Kyogo's a sell, but it's what you do with the money, how you replace the goals, and what price you replace those goals at. So Celtic are very good at that. I've said that 3 times now. I don't want to say it anymore. Rangers are pretty crap at it. They get the sporadic one, but it's more hit and miss. The Patterson guy, there was somebody else, the left back, Bassi, I think it was.
Yeah,
went to Ajax. Neither get a first. I don't think either are a first pick anymore. Look, this comes with practice. It's not random, and you need stability and you need patience. And you don't have that downriver at Rangers, so I think that's partially or mainly why we are streets ahead financially, and we've ended up with a better team and money in the bank. So we're doing pretty well. if you measure Celtic's success on a domestic scale.
Yeah.
But as I said elsewhere, it's all about Europe for me and people my age, and maybe we're finally going to get somewhere if this season is to be used as a yardstick for progress.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of encouragement, given. I mean, it was an up and down campaign, wasn't it? There was the lows of Dortmund, but the highs of Leipzig and elsewhere, and ultimately progressing and coming so near yet so far against Bayern. Just very quickly, while I remember, you talk about the sell zone and guys at 27. Daisen Maeda's 27. I hope he doesn't fall into that bracket anytime soon. He's been phenomenal.
Got a Japanese t-shirt on here.
Fair enough, representing. Yeah, but in terms of just a final question on the sales are very good and have been for some time. You're absolutely right. Wanyama's, Van Dijk's, Fraser Foster's, even Gary Hooper to an extent were bringing in pretty decent cash for Celtic at that time. But in terms of the other side of that coin, what Celtic pay for players hasn't always been top dollar. And I think the Arne Engels acquisition at 21 years of age, or actually 20 when we signed him, and 11 million, that looks like a shift in the thinking, a shift in the model. What's your take on it?
Yeah, if you're good at something, why not do more of the something? It is risky. You can get it spectacularly wrong. We got it wrong with a good few players. Tend to forget their names, but we've got some spectacular howlers in there. But as long as you get more right than wrong, you're still ahead of the game. So I think if you want Celtic to do well in Europe, which Brendan Rodgers certainly does, you've got to up the ante. And I think the acquisition that you talked about there is a very good one, and perhaps a harbinger of more to come, because just about every Celtic game in Europe this season, with maybe Dortmund being the exception, although I think we equalised one each before it went Pete Tong, did we not? Did not go 1-0 or 2-1 anyway.
Maeda equalised.
We have played well. This is just my interpretation. For about 60 minutes of every game, we've played. And I was thinking to myself, you know what? We're 2 players short to play well for the whole game. I don't think we are that far from having a very good team and playing well and beating these teams instead of, or at least drawing with them, the ones we lost. So I'm quite positive where Celtic is just now, which is unusual for me.
There's a lot to be said for keeping the squad together right now. That's a challenge. I'm of the same opinion. I think we're 2 or 3 players short of being a really decent side. But the guys that have got us so far and been a big part of this season are guys like Nicholas Kuhn, young and talented, Arne Engels, Maeda, who may be in the sell zone as discussed, Jota, who's still only 25. The challenge, as much as anything, is keeping these guys, isn't it?
But it is very, very difficult. And at the end of the day, these guys come here as a stepping stone. It's the truth that dare not speak his name. It's as old as Di Canio and Cadet. They all wanted the gig in the big league, and they manufacture reasons, spurious reasons to get out. So they come here, they get showcased, they do well, and they get a move, and everyone's a winner. Celtic have done well, get more money in the transfer market, and the player gets his move. Matt O'Reilly being a classic example of that philosophy. But again, going back to the experience and the clever bit, if a player wants away, you can't let him fester and not get his move. The danger is when you get a bunch of players all wanting away at the same time, like Neil Lennon had in the COVID season. That dressing room ended up getting infected because there was too many stale guys there, guys that wanted away, and percolated through the team, their own table and the canteen, etc. So players want away. You've got to manage that want away aspect to the team and not let them all be in the same team at the same time. So that's a management aspect to the transfer market you don't read about a lot. It's not an exact science, but it's certainly an art, put it that way.
Yeah, and I think it's a further reason why the club were right to move on Kyogo. I've
Totally.
voiced my frustration of the fact that we didn't have a replacement for him, and maybe that's a separate part of the chat. But Kyogo, yeah, I believe he'd reached optimal value. Celtic were unlikely to get more than 10 for him from anyone, and he wanted to go. And the manager's on record as saying for several months we knew he wanted to go. And if the Kuhns and Engels and others see the club holding on to players that don't want to leave, that's not very encouraging for them. They signed on the premise that they do well for a couple of years, you'll get your opportunity elsewhere. So, yeah, but I think by and large, Celtic are doing that side of things very well. Just to finish on the financials, David, before we move on to some stuff about, takeovers and whatnot, is there anything else commercially? Obviously, the numbers are really strong, but anything just as a headline commercially that you think Celtic could or should be doing better, or do you think they're in good hands?
There always is. I think the stadium is poor. The new game in town is a stadium refurbishment. It's across Europe. You've got Spurs and you've got Everton now, and Manchester United are talking about building a brand new stadium. You've got it in Barca and Madrid, and all over the place. It's the easiest thing for a football club to do. All football clubs, in a metaphor, figuratively speaking, all football clubs want to put all their money on the pitch. What that means is that not enough money goes into the fabric of the club. The fabric of the club, if you can distill it down to the stadium. So after 1 year, you don't notice any difference. After 10 years, you might not notice any difference. But it has this cumulative effect because you're not investing enough in the stadium. Suddenly, at some indeterminate point in the future, could be 20 years, 30 years, you see this stadium is not fit for the purpose of the day. And this is the story of football. All clubs suffered from a lack of investment in the stadium. And it required a disaster, at Ibrox, or a fire disaster at Bradford, or a hooliganism at Heysel, to focus the mind. And then the government steps in with some legislation and forces you to catch up with 20, 30 years of underinvestment in the stadium. Now, I said that before I say about Celtic. Celtic, the stadium that Fergus, we'll call it for dramatic purposes, Fergus built. Do you know what? It's an old stadium already. It's old. And the main stand is even older. And the stand, the building's been there since God knows how long. The stand was built in 1970, I think. I was actually at the opening with the Uruguayan team. It was Penarol, it was. And then the fancy bit, the offices, the Walford restaurant, boxes, that was all built in 1988 for the centenary year. And it was the first time Celtic went into debt, £2 million worth of debt. That's dead old now. It's pretty shit, in fact. I mean, I go to hospitality in a lot of places, and staff's brilliant. Celtic hospitality staff talk about. The food's actually very good. Sounds very poncy, I know, but at the end of the day, it's like walking into a time warp in some of those boxes. Celtic's badly in need of serious capex in the main stand. It's outrageous that fans with the most expensive seats in the main stand, 700, I've got 4 of them for my kids, £700 plus in the main stand, get shifted for the big games in Europe. So that the press can sit in our seats, and then the press themselves get to hang out in a tent in the car park. That's why that's just not good look for a team that aspires to be one of Europe's top clubs in terms of recognition and status at the stadium. Scotland's only got one Category 4. This is off the top of the head, so I might get corrected. UEFA Category 4 stadium, top grade, and that's Hampden, and that's crap unless you're sitting in a fancy seat.
Yeah.
The other ones being Cardiff, one in Dublin, and Wembley. So wouldn't it be great if we had a Category 4 stadium? Wouldn't it be great if we could host European games, finals, etc.? But I'd want Celtic to invest heavily in the stadium, improving the facilities in the main stand, and maybe even extending the capacity. I know it costs a lot, but I heard the same argument in 1994. Oh, it's going to cost too much. Oh, you'll never fill it. Well, to hell with that. At the end of the day, I do think, to answer your question in my long roundabout way, Celtic needs some serious capex in that main stand. I think it's embarrassing now.
Yeah, and it's
Rangers as well, by the way. That's part of their problem. But sorry,
absolutely. There's a swell of opinion, a groundswell of opinion that the stadium has become very dated. And as you say, the stadium that Fergus built, 1995, give or take, 30 years ago this year. The other three stands out with the main stand were obviously new at that time. They themselves are, I wouldn't say they're creaking, but they could do with some upgrading as well. But certainly the main stand was the front facade that we all know, the kind of apex that's been in place, as you say, since centenary year of 1988. And I do remember hearing I don't know what you'd call it, the kind of ethos or the thinking at Celtic is that we budget for Europa League, and if we get Champions League, it's a bonus. And sometimes it feels like that. And that's a frustration, because we are, at this moment in time, what are we now, 2-3 seasons in a row in the Champions League? We're getting there. We're seeing a bit of progress, certainly on the park. It's not always reflected off the park. The tent that you mentioned, it's a white marquee out the front of the stadium to cover press requirements and different things on Champions League match days.
Yeah, let's call it a tent, though.
Let's call it a tent for the drama. So things like that. And let me ask you then, so a lot of fans have been crying out for the increase in capacity that you mentioned to something in the region of 80,000. We're currently 60,000, give or take. And the feeling is, and maybe this is too simplistic, you can tell me, that the upturn in season ticket sales that you would get as a result would see the renovations pay for themselves in time. What do you think of that? Is there smart ways to borrow? People are saying it's £100 million investment. You wouldn't be putting 100 million down. How would that work? Would you borrow and leverage in different ways?
Well, all I'm doing is saying it's a necessity, because you'll have to do it at some point, and postponing it just means the cost is going to get higher. This is the situation we found ourselves in 1994. We'll do it to, the old board I'm talking about. Well, by the time there comes a point when you need to do it, so postponing it, and it will inevitably end up costing you more. But look, Celtic haven't had, how do you finance it? Celtic haven't had a share issue since 2005. There's kids going to Celtic games, or adults going to Celtic games, that talk about Fergus McCann the same way as I'd talk about Charlie Tully, some guy I'd never seen but I'd heard of, Kaiser Soze type vibe going on. So at the end of the day, and everybody that bought shares between 1994, there was 4 share issues, 5, but 4 big ones between 1994 and 2005, and there's been nothing since. So there's an untapped market for ownership in Celtic. So a share issue is a source of capital.
And how would that work then? Yeah.
Well, it would work the same way as previous ones worked. You could, at its most simple level, you would have a share issue to all the existing shareholders in proportion to their shares. So that means that every existing shareholder would have the ability to end up with their same percentage of the club. So if everybody doubled their holding, for example, you would still have the same percentage, but percentages are only for the big guys that care about what percentage of Celtic they own. And then there's that whole market that doesn't have any shares at all, because none have been issued in the 20 years. So there's a demand from a new generation of Celtic supporters for shares. So Celtic could certainly, indubitably, raise money. You can speculate as to how much through a new share issue. They have their cash in their bank as well. And they can introduce some modest debt if they had to, the same way as we did back in the day, for the refurb that's now old. So I absolutely reject any suggestion whatsoever that Celtic cannot afford reconfigure the main stand. I think that's the case. Yeah.
Okay. And so just to simplify
so they could be doing that. That was your question. What could they be doing that they're not doing? They could be doing that.
Certainly could. If they do carry a new share issue, David, then again, just for, layman's terms and all that kind of stuff, does it dilute the value? So if I'm Joe Bloggs and I've got 500 shares in Celtic and they raise a share issue, if my £500 is worth X today, is it worth X, divided by 2? Is it worth 50% the next day?
Yeah. So if the current, you can have a new share issue at any price you want. I mean, there was a share issue in 2005, which is half the price of the shares were 60p-ish at the time, and the new shares were issued at 30. For lots of reasons, maybe another podcast at another date.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer your question, the current share price off the top of the head is 160p. You could offer new shares at any price you think is reasonable. It could be at 160p, or it could be what's called a deep discount issue. And that would be like £1, say, and they would be offered in proportion to your existing shareholder. So again, you can play with the proportion. It could be a 1-for-1. For every share you got, you've been offered another share at the price. Or it could be 1-for-2, 1-for-3, 1-for-4. It could be whatever you think is sensible given the quantum of the project, if we're talking about money for improving the main stand.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody would lose out. You would only sort of lose out, if you want to use that phrase, lose out, if you declined to take up the offer of these new shares.
Mm-hmm.
But all it would really mean is your percentage of the company is diluted. But so what if you're just a wee guy? It doesn't really matter whether you own 0.0001% and it ends up with 0.00009%. Who cares?
Yeah.
Celtic get the money. Celtic use it to improve the prospects of Celtic. Now, in all of this, I'm not saying for 1 minute there's any appetite on the Celtic board to have a share issue for lots of reasons. Not for lots of reasons, for several reasons. Because they might disagree entirely about the need for improvement in the main stand or the need for a rights issue to raise capital. I'm just answering your question. I think that's one thing they could be doing.
Just the last question on that then. If Celtic decide they want to raise a new share issue this year, 2025, who has the final say on that? Is that a Dermot Desmond? Do you need over 51% to okay it? Is it a board decision that's voted on? How would it come about if those that be, the powers that be, decide they want it?
It's the board that sit down and decide whether they want to do it or not. And the board is, again, figuratively speaking, votes, all those in favour. I'm sure that wouldn't happen. But the board basically determined, that they want to do it. Then you employ advisors that put it all together, and then you distribute the offer to the shareholders. But at the end of the day, it's Dermot Desmond that decides, because if he wants something, it happens. Because he is the dominant shareholder and very likely the controlling shareholder. So if he wants it to happen, if he wants anything to happen, it'll happen, irrespective of what the others think.
Okay. And we'll see if there's any movement there at all at any point in the near future. David, let's kick on to the news that's kind of caught a lot of the headlines in Scottish football over the last few days, and it's the proposed takeover of Rangers by 49ers Enterprise, who are the group that currently own and operate San Francisco 49ers, the NFL team. They're owned by the York family, a family with an estimated net worth of $6 billion. Their chief exec is Jed York of the York family. And a key player in the deal seems to be the current Leeds United chairman, a guy whose name I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, but I'll give it a go, Parag Marath. What's your general take, David? What's your initial thoughts when you heard the news breaking of that?
Well, at the end of the day, neither Rangers nor San Francisco 49ers have confirmed anything. It's all, and even today, the football conference in London, the Financial Times football conference in London, Parahi, I'll pronounce it. I don't know.
I'll go with your pronunciation.
The lead CEO, talked around the subject. He didn't actually confirm there's any interest in Rangers. So anything I see is within the context that neither Rangers nor San Francisco 49ers have confirmed anything. This is this is no more at the moment anyway than a leak, an informed leak out of Ibrox for whatever reason. It might be to help facilitate season tickets. I don't know, don't really care. But this is all predicated on a leak that's come out of Ibrox, a planned leak, because we know who had the story first. Nothing, and I'm in America just now, and I do work with private equity in San Francisco. Nothing's come out of San Francisco at all about this. So having caveated the situation with that, what I will say is Rangers need to get taken over by somebody with pockets to deal with challenges that they face, and that is lack of money. Dave King called it investor fatigue. I'll call it no more money, because it doesn't make sense whether you're the late Brooks Mileston or the late Eddie Thompson. Comes a point where your kids go, "What are you doing, Dad?" It's again, to be dramatic. You can't do it forever and ever and ever, because you'll end up with nothing. And when you end up with nothing, what do? You resign from the board on health grounds and have somebody else find the money for you. So Rangers need a deal like this. It makes sense. It is a brand, whether you like it or not. It has a history, and I'm not getting into the new club old thing here, whether you like it or not. But it's an old history. If you look at in my lifetime, Rangers have been going downhill for 60 years. Certainly this century, they've won a quarter and only of the Premier League titles, and the freaky one only since the new club was formed due to the COVID thing. So they're not in a good space. Their stadium's very old. To go back there, that stadium's even older than the Celtics. That club, for my money, needs a minimum of 58 million, if not 100 million, not just to create the architecture that I talked about, to play the transfer market, the scouting system, but also the stadium. It really needs an overhaul. It needs a dominating figure. I mean, we have a dominating figure. We had Fergus, and now we've got Dermot Desmond. It needs somebody it needs a shot caller in modern parlance. Somebody who says what happens, and somebody who's got the gravitas and the money to back it up. Rangers don't have that. Rangers started off in the current guise with 20 million quid in the bank through that share issue when they came to the AIM market. They've squandered it all. Bad contracts, bad faith, bad managers, infighting, half a dozen or more chairmen, 4 or 5 different boards, getting tossed from pillar to post, and now they find themselves with no money, nobody in charge, nobody in control. So it makes sense that to get taken over or to get serious investment from a wealthy third party like 49ers or somebody else of that ilk, a Forbes 400. These are all, there's lots of activity of this sort in the States just now. And, a deal between Rangers and 49ers could make sense. But I don't think it's quite as straightforward as a lot of Rangers fans would like to think it is. Should it happen? Because it's still only speculation.
Yeah, should it happen? You used the analogy, David. What you doing, Dad? What you doing with the family fortunes, if you like.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you the question: the Jed York is the chief exec of the 49ers just now. So his kids, if he's got kids, are they saying to him, what are you doing, Dad? Because what's in it for the 49ers? Where do they see the value here? Because as you say, there's a lot of spend, a lot of capex required first and foremost just to get the house in order, steady the ship and all that stuff. So say the 49ers put in 50, 60, 70, 80 million. Where do they then see a return? What's the upside for them? What's the attraction of investing in such a club? Is it a long game?
Well, if you use a US sports parlance, it's a franchise. These franchises, they're not bought necessarily for the right amount of money they make.
Okay.
They're not even necessarily bought in order to win things. It's sad as me to say. They're bought as investments. Now in the States, and there's a lot of American people, successful American businessmen in the States that are losing shed loads of money with European sports franchises. They'll never see their money back because it's a completely different game. But in America, you have the draft, for example, which levels out the financial playing field in terms of who gets what player. There is no relegation. I'm talking about NFL and other sports as well. So it doesn't matter how shit you are, nothing bad's going to happen to you. I mean, I could tell you stories about guys I've worked with in the noughties. Tell me more about this relegation, Dave. When the team was fifth bottom. Anyway, there's only a finite amount of major league sports franchises in the States. This is what was told to me. I worked with people in San Francisco. There's only a finite amount of sports franchises in the States. And there's a lot more billionaires in the States than there are sports franchises. So if you run that sports franchise, Dave, on the two-check principle, we'll all make a lot of money together. And Dave goes, well, what's the two-check principle? The two-check principle is you buy me a football club or soccer club with a small check. You run it, we get a CPA, that's an American chartered accountant, CA, to run it. And then when we sell it, that CPA's made sure I don't write any more checks. I'll get a great big check for it. And that's how it works. That's the two check. You buy with a little check, you sell it, you get a big check. And the CPA makes sure you don't write any more checks in between. So supply and demand means that the value of a franchise, because there's only a fixed amount of them, you get the odd expansion franchise, and sometimes you get the relocation franchise. Big famous one in baseball was the Brooklyn Dodgers going to LA back in the day. The value of the franchise goes up, and that's why Texas, Dallas Cowboys, San Francisco, New York Yankees are all worth billions of dollars. They're worth billions of dollars not based on the amount of money they make or the amount of money they lose. They're based on their scarcity value. Now, 49ers are worth $6 billion or something off the top of the head. That's not justified financially. That's basically because of the scarcity factor. For them to buy Leeds and for them to buy or Glasgow Rangers, it's, again, figuratively speaking, it's pocket change, and it's not like it's going to do the buyer any serious financial damage in the way that it did to Eddie Thompson because his name came up, or Brooks Mileston back in the day. It's not significant. But what they would do if they follow if this were to happen, and they followed the two-check principle, the amount of money, which is all Rangers fans or any other fans would be interested in, to be spent in the team is capped by the financial stability regulations of UEFA, and of course this two-check principle. Nobody's going to throw money at this, and UEFA rules won't allow anybody to throw money at it. Where the money, for my money, will get spent, whether it's the 49ers or anybody else, is on, guess what? The stadium, the facilities. If you spend, because Ibrox is older than Celtic Park, not been there for a few years now. But I do remember it wasn't very good. But I could see American investors spending an awful lot of money. What's an awful lot? Tens of millions. on the stadium, the facilities in the stadium, and if they can squeeze a greater capacity out of the stadium, even if it's 5%, that's 3,000 seats. Rangers can charge more. When you have better facilities, you can get away with charging more. Right now, even before money is getting spent, if Rangers play more games in a season than Celtic and Rangers charge their fans more than we charge our fans, that reduces the gap. But that's the way to go. And then marketing as well. You get your cross-marketing opportunities stateside, the quintessentially British club type thing. Maybe it's like that. But it's an investment that won't lose them a lot of money. I'm pretty sure about that. And again, to go back to my experience in the noughties, looking at clubs, for I can't say who it was for. It was the same criteria. Do you want a big fish in a small pond, or do you want a small fish in a big pond? An example of a small fish in a big pond would be like, as it was, Derby County or something. Or do you want a big fish like Celtic or Rangers in a small pond? Because the big fish in a small pond has a lot of attractions. It provides an entree, better odds of an entree into Europe than they would do than buying a Derby County. But that was years ago. The amount of riches to be had in the Premiership without ever playing in Europe is a lot more now than it was back in the day. So there's all these different factors that get taken into account. But I don't think losing money is an issue here. It's the big fish in a small pond. All we've got to do is beat Celtic, get us into Europe, and hey ho, we're back to where we think we should be.
Yeah, and I suppose you're also investing in a captive audience, a global audience. You could debate the size of Celtic and Rangers globally, but there are fans across the globe for both clubs, and maybe there's an interest there. You were talking as well about things that would help Rangers close the gap, and an increase in capacity, playing more games, etc. This has been the thing since Fergus's time, that Celtic have this inbuilt advantage because Fergus made the move, had the foresight to build a 60,000 capacity stadium against Rangers 50,000. You've therefore got 10,000 more seats to sell every single year, and that's a huge plus. That's right. Those 10,000, all that pain that happened, all that shouting at Fergus that happened. Look at the return we've had from it. That's the reason we are where we are now. The 10,000 seats times 30 games a season times 50 quid plus discretionary spend gives us an inbuilt financial advantage over Rangers. I almost said forever and a day, but certainly for as long as we have the 10,000 more seats. Yeah.
But look, here's an awful truth that dare not speak its name. The Celtic support, and by association, the Rangers support in the USA, for example, is nothing. Nothing. It's insignificant, inconsequential, of no import whatsoever. I watched the game during the week there in a bar in New Orleans, the New Orleans Celtic Supporters Club. There was more Barcelona fans and Liverpool fans, and I think actually there's a Bournemouth fan. The Bournemouth game was on. It was Brighton game was on because Matt O'Reilly came on. Just me and another guy, and that's symptomatic of most Celtic clubs now, apart from maybe New York. It's Grandad's favourite soccer team. That's what it is now. It truly is.
Do you mean you would mean inconsequential, David, in terms of the financial contribution they make to Celtic? There's obviously emotional ties with various clubs, and we've spoken to Celtic supporters clubs across the States. There's obviously an emotional tie for a lot of folks, but in terms of
but it's an aging demographic. I mean, it really is, because, and again, you can see it depending on what city you're in. And listen, now I helped set up the North American Federation in 1996. I was involved in the Las Vegas convention. I did the TV deal. It sounds like I'm being immodest here, for the original one with CNN in Waterloo, Canada. I know the size of the Celtic and therefore Rangers support, and it's not big. It's an aging demographic. It's Grandad's favourite soccer team. The sons likes the Celtics, but not as much as dad. And the grandsons like it as well, but not as much as, that's just the way it goes. The real opportunity, this is an opinion now, is cashing in on, that I think, is the Irish diaspora rather than the Celtic one. Celtic's a subset of the Irish diaspora. It's a diaspora that, for example, that Conor McGregor, and I'm not talking about him as an individual or his sport, a very average MMA fighter, with excellent management, a guy called Audi Attar in Las Vegas became his business partner. And McGregor was able to successfully tap into this Irish diaspora, the Shamrocks and Shillelaghs, the House of Pain, that type of thing. And it made McGregor one of the richest sportsmen in the world ever. I mean, right up there with Tiger Woods, because of the way he was marketed. So that's the opportunity, if you like, that Celtic could consider cashing in on. The Irish diaspora, of which we're a subset. We've got a fantastic history. We know the history. We're not going to go into it. But Rangers, on the other hand, quintessentially British club. Is there any cross-marketing opportunities there that a 49ers see? I don't know. But time will tell.
Yeah. Let me ask you two questions, David. One would be the potential blockers for any deal happening. So just in terms of reading up on some of the things, Rangers obviously have got shareholders like Dave King that I mentioned. I think he's got 13%, Douglas Park 12%, George Taylor 10%, John Bennett 7%, to name but a few. These guys can all put up the blockers, for a deal like that. So my question would be, is there a challenge for the 49ers enterprise to get past that first and foremost? And my second question would be, is your gut feeling, and we've caveated the whole thing by saying it's rumour at this moment in time, but is your gut feeling that a deal will eventually go through?
Well, that's a few questions. Look, the Rangers have ran out of road. Investor fatigue. Let's deal with what's been said. Investor fatigue is a euphemism for running out of dough. They're all, most of them are in their 70s now. They've put in an awful lot of money. It's got nowhere. They're having to, I always say, beg, steal, or borrow. You can't keep having these share issues. It's the end of the road for this current regime. It needs a change in the dynamic, and I don't see any pushback if the price is right. Bennett says he wants out. Dave King says he wants out. There's 20%. So any deal would go like, I tell you what, get the price right. And I think it would be like 20 pence minimum. There's a mechanism for valuing clubs. Rangers turnover is, well, Rangers have got 500 million shares. The board are issuing shares to themselves at 20 pence. That would value Rangers at £100 million, for example, 20 pence a share. So, and this is a hypothesis, by the way, no more than that. So a conversation would go like, we're prepared to accept 20 pence a share for our shares, but because we're a PLC and because it's the decent thing to do, I'd like you to extend that offer to all the shareholders. And I think that would be a necessity because Rangers is a PLC and you can't go above 29.9% without making an offer to everybody, unless you get a dispensation from the takeover panel. But I think all parties would want an offer to be made to all the shareholders, because I think if the 49ers, we're not about the 49ers, they would want control of the whole thing. So it makes sense for them to make an offer to everybody and end up with X. X could be like 70%. Might be some shareholders that don't want to sell for their own reason. That's fine. But all that does is transfer ownership from a bunch of guys to the 49ers. In itself, it doesn't put any money into the club's bank account. So as well as buying out some or a lot of shareholders, there has to be money to be put into the club's bank account. So new shares have to be issued. And again, they could be offered to all the shareholders or just individuals. The appropriate permissions are put in place. But when you add it all up, to take over Rangers or to get a controlling interest in Rangers with a few minority shareholders is probably going to cost like 150 million quid. That's my fag packet estimate. And, you know, if that succeeded, they would run it professionally. I suggest in the two check principle I mentioned, they get good management in and be the best they can be. But I think there'd be an overhaul of the stadium as well.
Mm-hmm.
As to whether the 49ers actually see it through, as to quote Jimmy Cliff, there are many rivers to cross. I think there's a long way to go, and it may not happen. I suspect they've looked at other opportunities as well. I can use my own experience from the Naughties. We must have looked at a dozen football clubs and ended up buying none. And this is from a family very similar to Jed York's family, Forbes 400, big dogs. Ended up buying none. There was a financial crash that came along. Maybe that was the reason. So many rivers to cross. Who knows whether this will happen or not.
And then just, I was going to ask just a final question. So you mentioned UEFA's FSR, financial sustainability rules, because my last question really is what impact could this have on Celtic in terms of what we're currently doing on and off the park? Because, as you rightly say, David, the 49ers or whoever might come in and take over Rangers, they can't then say, and there's a couple of $100 million for the playing squad, because that's not how it works. And FSR is there to ensure that clubs don't spend more than they earn. That's the bottom line. So it's not the magic bullet or the silver bullet that everyone or some of a Rangers persuasion thinks, is it?
Well, it's as you say, but what it does bring is the things that I said are missing. Number one, it introduces stability. Number two, it introduces a controlling shareholder. Number three, it introduces money. And that's the starting point. You're financially stable, you've got firm leadership, and you get money. And remember, investment in the infrastructure is distinct from the football structure. The return that you will get from that will generate more money for, guess what, the football team. So I would see a lot of money going into the infrastructure. And remember, infrastructure, as I said, doesn't count for FSR in the FSR calculation. So it makes sense. It's just all you're debating here is at what price does it make sense? But there are byproducts here. I'm absolutely sure Celtic receives approaches that never make the light of day for exactly the same reasons. Big fish, small pond, or little fish in big pond, top dog in Scotland, the whole Irish, Celtic, Scottish thing, Brother Walford. It's very, very appealing story for an awful lot of people. I know that the Black Knights that ended up buying Hibs, would have loved to have bought Celtic, for example. Bill Foley's one of those classic guy that runs Black Knights, classic Irish-American types, In fact, over here, nobody from America, they're all from somewhere else, So maybe I'm just havering here, but, a takeover of Rangers will put Celtic firmly in a shop window as well. And as you know from previous things I've said on your podcast, I fear for whose hands Celtic could end up in. That's why I was very keen to make sure that the fans had a say and that these issues of lost shares were dealt with. Because a lost share is a non-voting share, and 20% of our shares can't vote.
Yeah, and what I'll do there, just for anyone that's new to that, myself and David recorded an episode a few months back now, just about, I think it was entitled "Who Owns Celtic?", i.e., where are all the shares and that type of thing. I'll link to that in the show notes for this episode for anyone who does want to catch up on that. Yeah, so very much a case of let's watch this space and see what potentially happens with the 49ers and or maybe any other investors and Rangers. So we'll need to see how it goes. A couple of questions just as we start to wrap things up, David, and they are connected, of course. I've actually got 3 quick-fire questions, but one was about Celtic Stadium and potential upgrades there to the main stand and otherwise, so we'll skip that one for now. But 2 questions then to see us out. The first one being, quite simply, do Celtic need a strong Rangers to thrive and to flourish?
Totally. It's my boxing analogy. Boxers have to spar. and they have to spar with somebody of similar ability. No point a heavyweight sparring against a welterweight. A weak Rangers is not a good thing for Celtic. It's just, we've got all our jokes, but a weak Rangers is not a good thing for Celtic. You need competition. A stronger league. You need a stronger league. There's only been 6 teams won the league in my lifetime, and only, I could say 2, but I'll say 3 teams won it in the last 40 clubs, won it in the last 40 years. That's not competition. That's not an attractive product. It just isn't. So you want strong Rangers.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's won it out with a Celtic or Rangers since Jim McLean, Dundee United in the early to mid 80s, something like that. So on that then, David, in terms of, yes, Rangers, Celtic potentially do need a strong Rangers. What would your response be to, there was a lot of mudslinging around the time of the 5-way agreement, and, Celtic had their foot on Rangers' neck and we could have buried them. Can you see absolutely from a business point of view why Celtic wouldn't want to bury Rangers?
Yeah, because they're good for... The Scottish game needs their money, needs Celtic's money. Celtic almost went out of the game in 1953 over the Irish flag, and it was Rangers' casting vote that kept them in. You know what? Because it was good for business. That's cynical, but it's true. A Scottish game without... And there was never any prospect of Rangers disappearing. But having them at the top, maybe that's the way to look at it. There was a strong desire to bend and break the rules to get Rangers into the top, straight back into the top tier straight away. And Celtic, did their bit to try it, and the other couple of other clubs as well, to procure that. And of course, it didn't happen. And look at our crowds, by the way. With Ronnie Dahlia for a few years, big drapes over there. It's not good for business. So there's a moral argument, and they've got to stick to the rules. That a strong Rangers are needed, and a strong Celtic, and strong competition are all in Celtic's best interests. No matter how much we want to joke about this, that, and the other. And I don't know what the correct words are, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I would also say, absolutely, you could talk about business and other areas of life, but absolutely in sport, competition ultimately makes you better. It keeps you sharp, it keeps you focused, and that's got to be true of Celtic. Whether some would like to admit it or not, but if Rangers dwindled, is it just does it become it feels like a one-horse race right now, if truth be told.
Yeah, Rangers. The irony is Rangers have dwindled. Rangers are not the club they were, and I don't mean that 1 club, 2 club. They're not. They are not what they think they are, and they're not what they were. Times have changed. They don't have special privileges. They don't have anything. You've got to hack it on your own, and to hack it on your own, you need money and you need management, and you've got to drop this. Nobody likes us. We don't care, and we're entitled to this, that, the other attitude. You're as good as the points you get. 20 to 5 on a Saturday, and maybe I think the penny's dropped. It's inconceivable that these guys would be selling out of Rangers in the way that is suggested. We've been talking about. Had they not come to the end of the line, this is a game changer. And indeed, if these San Francisco guys get in, this is their Fergus McCann moment. I'll call it that. This is a game changer. It was a game changer for them. It's a game changer for us, because it means we have people who are capable of constructing a platform for moving forward the way that McCann and his team did in 1994. It's an absolute game changer. And that means if it happens, it'll be good for Rangers. Well, good for Celtic, because competition is a good thing.
Yeah, some really interesting stuff there. Last question, David. Quite simply again, if you had a magic wand and could change just one thing about how Celtic are currently being run, what would that be?
I would like the board to show more respect to Celtic fans and shareholders. I think we're treated badly. I think the milk is for too much, charging trivial things, like credit card usage and getting money out of an ATM. And I just don't think we get the respect that we're due, because without us, they're nothing. They're absolutely nothing. They take money out of the club. Don't put money into it, like all of us. So more respect for the fans. I think they've lost their political side to Celtic. Celtic were always a political club, right back to the formation with Michael Davitt, and the Dodds of Grass, and the connection with Ireland, good causes, the stance that Bob Kelly took. I think it was Hungary in the 60s, was it? Or was it Czechoslovakia? I think it was Czechoslovakia, actually. I'm with the Green Brigade in support for Palestinian people and the people in Gaza. Football's not as important as life and death. I think we've lost a wee bit of our the club itself, not the fans of the club, its political edge, and I think we should take more of a lead. That's two things, by the way. I'll stop speaking.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I'll give you the two. Just on that, a lot of folks would say that politics doesn't have a place in football, but would you be of the very opposite ilk?
Football should be politics should be centre stage in football. It's incumbent that football clubs that can influence people to take a stance on moral issues, and life and death, especially when life and death is concerned. Yeah, absolutely fair. David, just as I say, we're kind of towards the end of the piece now, and I would just ask if you've got any final thoughts. We've covered a lot, haven't we? We've covered Celtic's financials, the speculation over any potential takeover at Rangers, some other bits and bobs, some things that might be operated better or differently at Celtic. But any final thoughts as we wrap this one up? No, we're in a good space. We're kings of the castle, financially secure, winning things. Looks like Europe's going to get more exciting, which is where I'm interested. And despite a few of the things I'm saying, I'm more happy than sad about where Celtic is just now. Fix the main stand, please.
That'll be next on the list, but we'll watch that space and we'll see how it goes. Okay. David, been great to chat to you today, and as always, to get your insight into the business and financial side of Celtic and Scottish football. Enjoy the rest of your time out there in Texas, and we'll speak to you again really soon.